finally, we are going to a federal election. And boom, we are live. What's up, everybody? Couple Casuals podcast. I am your host, Stefano, and we have an emergency podcast for you guys today. Okay, I'm here on a solo episode. I'm with my buddy Dean.
What's up?
We got my buddy Dean here ready for an important episode, guys, because there is some breaking news in Canada, okay? In the political world, there are some things going on right now that we need to discuss. It's something that we've been waiting for the longest time throughout COVID, throughout the past 9 years of Justin Trudeau destroying this country. Finally, we are going to a federal election, okay? I repeat, we are going to a federal election. This is very important, guys, because we've been waiting for this for a long time with 9 years of the Liberal Party. So we got to get in here and discuss some things that are going on. There's so much happening right now that we need to discuss in Canada. But not too long ago, Mark Carney, the new unelected default prime minister, has gone to the Governor General and he has asked to dissolve Parliament, sending Canadians to the polls for April 28th. It's going to happen sooner than you guys think, guys. We got pretty much a little bit over a month at this point to pretty much take this country back. This election, just some opening thoughts here, and then Dean, I'm going to come to you for some opening thoughts on this.
Sure.
Guys, this is the most important election, in my opinion, in Canadian history. We have to stay dialed in, we have to stay engaged, and take this country back. And we're going to run through some things today, guys. We're going to talk about how this happened. We're going to talk about who is Mark Carney, because we have to discuss who Mark Carney is. I think most people don't actually know who he is. He's this new face that people are somewhat getting excited about, but we're going to talk about some interesting things about Mark Carney, and we're going to really unpack who the real Mark Carney is today in today's episode, okay? We're going to talk about his carbon tax adjustment that he made that Canadians are so excited about, and amongst other things. We're going to talk about some interesting shiftings of polls that have been happening. There's been some shift of polls, which we'll discuss and maybe unpack. Is that something to be alarmed about? Is that something not to be alarmed about? We're going to talk about the United States and Donald Trump and how Trump and the U.S. are affecting the Canadian elections and maybe shifting and influencing the polls a little bit, because they definitely are. And I actually think that it's probably one of the main reasons on why they decided to have this snap election. We're going to talk about what Trump said about Canada and who he has endorsed. That was pretty interesting. And who would do better working with Trump, Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre? We're not even going to talk about Jagmeet Singh because they're done. But who would do better? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre. Where is he lacking? What is he doing well? His plan. And we're going to run through a reminder I think that Canadians need to know the damage that the Liberals have done in the past 9 years. So opening thoughts, Dean, we are going to the polls April 28th. What are your thoughts on it, man?
I think I still think if all things considered, if everything is as equal as it is now, and they're just kind of both coast along for the next couple of months, no major changes, I think Pierre still wins. I think he's still conservative, still wins. Mm-hmm. Obviously, anything can happen, so who knows? But I would like to see Pierre push a little harder. I think he's kind of knows he's captured the younger crowd, but he's got to push a little harder with the older crowd who are comfortable. They're living in $1 million houses that they barely paid anything for. They don't want any major change. Everything's kind of okay, right? Mm-hmm. But the younger people, it's a disaster.
So you think that's where he's doing the worst is with the older folks? I think a poll came out showing that it was 55 or 60 at a certain age, the older folks. He's not doing very well with them, and they seem to be influencing the polls big time. Is that what you're gathering?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I would imagine it has a lot to do with what I just said. They're doing pretty good. And that age group is doing pretty good because they bought houses for nothing when they were worth nothing in this city. They've seen their houses 10x, 15x, 20x in the last 20 years. Even more if they bought them before that. So they're kind of the status quo with them. It's like, this new guy, new government, everything's been good for the last 10, 15 years. It's fine. I don't want to vote for some new guy. Who knows what this guy is? Is he like Trump? Is he going to be the Canadian Trump? So I think he's got some more work to do on the opinion of the older crowd, but I think he's captured the younger crowd. They're smarter. They see the clips on TikTok. They see him speaking, He's just a little bit more approachable or authentic, I think, in the eyes of young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he needs to do a little bit more of work too, which we're going to talk about. We're going to get into some areas that he's lacking. Because, you look at the States and it was really the election of the podcast and stuff, which he's not doing, which we'll talk about some interesting things there. But did you expect it? Did you think Mark Carney was going to go with the election? And some people say they're capitalizing on the issues that's happening with the United States, and then other people were speculating, which I know Jonathan Harvey did when we had him on, and some other political folks that we talked to were saying that they thought that maybe Jagmeet and Mark Carney were going to make a deal and then sort of what is it called, form a coalition again,
right?
Until the original scheduled date, which was in October in the fall. So, what did you expect it? Did you think that was what was gonna happen?
Yeah, I was like 50-50. Either they're going to ride a wave of something that happens that's good, like, fighting back against Trump right now. Canadians are unified. He's got, some celebrities behind him. Or they were going to try to draw out and give him as much time to prove himself. So it was hard to decide, or hard to, imagine which was going to happen. But yeah, I'm not surprised it's a snap election, or, a pretty close election.
You know what, strategically wise, I think the Liberals are doing a pretty decent job, guys, which is this is where as the Canadians, we need to do a couple things right now. We need to stay engaged and we need to use our voice, okay? And for the non-political individuals in Canada, the people who are apolitical, not interested in politics, we need you. This is where you guys got to really think about your future, about your money, your bank accounts, your family's life, your child's life. You need to think about this right now, because no matter how much we may be annoyed by politics, I know we talk about this, Dean, too. Sometimes we just need to disengage from politics because it can get freaking overwhelming. No matter how much we want to stay away from it, guys, this election, especially for Canadians, it's very important. So we need to stay engaged and we need to show up and vote. People say, oh, it doesn't matter what you do. But actually, if you vote, that's where you actually issue your power. Is in the voting box. So on April 28th, we need all Canadians to show up, because this is the most important election. And we're going to talk about why. But let's discuss how this happened, okay? Trudeau, for the past 9 years, Trudeau and the Liberals, because we can't separate the two. Let's remember, guys, Trudeau and the Liberals are one of the same. And now Mark Carney, also who was an advisor, we'll get deep into it. They're all the same. Just remember that. Remember that as sentiment as we go through the podcast. But for 9 years, the Liberals and Trudeau destroyed this country with high inflation, high taxes, high crime, government overreach, ethics violations, censorship, etc., which ultimately led to his resignation on January 6th, 2025. He then remained in office and still acted as Prime Minister, making important decisions for Canada like negotiating tariffs. How funny was that? He was resigned, and then Trump was issuing the warnings of tariffs, and we got Trudeau going down there, our resigned Prime Minister, while they had us prorogued for 3 months, which we're going to talk about now shortly. And Trudeau's there negotiating our tariffs, negotiating business dealings for Canada, which was funny because they didn't care about border security and they let mass immigration come into Canada. They didn't spend any money on border defense. Then Trump comes in and says, you guys need to invest into the defense of your border. And the next thing Trudeau does is issue millions of dollars to the border repairs. Dean, what do you think about Trump and Trudeau and how he stepped in to negotiate for us as the resigned prime minister?
Yeah, I think it was embarrassing. It's like, especially, a lot of people in Canada didn't understand how that was happening, how he resigned and he was still there doing stuff like a prime minister would. So I had a couple American friends asking me, like, how does this happen? How is this guy still talking? I thought he quit, or you thought he resigned. Why aren't they switching him out at least? Why aren't they doing something? Why is there no election? It's just embarrassing. The whole system is embarrassing, where he got to resign instead of, it's like what Jonathan Harvey said. He's a coward. He's a coward.
He took the coward's way out. Yeah, exactly. He resigned and he still acted as prime minister for us, making decisions while they kept us prorogued. Because that's exactly what happened, guys. The Canadian government was prorogued and still is prorogued, technically speaking, since January 6th. Basically, 3-month period. In that time, major trade issues with the U.S. have occurred. Canadians were forced to sit back and wait while the Liberals kept this country hostage. So for the people who are extremely frustrated with Trump, okay, you guys are upset with Trump. You're upset with the fact that he's saying Canada's going to be the 51st state, that the tariff situation. Remember, the Canadian government and the Liberals in particular tax you more than Trump, okay? And then even an extension further than that, the Liberals have kept us hostage, okay, and prorogued while this situation occurred. They didn't care about you enough to go, we need to immediately resolve this. They kept the government prorogued while this issue with the United States and Trump was ongoing, okay? It was absolutely shameful. People are so upset about the big bad Trump, which the liberal media is doing a great job at painting that picture, which we'll talk about extensively very, very soon. But you have to remember that the government was prorogued. They didn't care enough to get back to the chopping block and make some things happen. They had us prorogued. They had Canadians waiting while the Liberals sorted out their shit. And we had to sit back and wait because internally, the Liberals had the biggest disapproval rating of Trudeau in his whole time in his leadership. And then they go ahead and finally say, guys, it's time for a new leader. And we have to wait as Canadians during this time of scrutiny for them to figure out their shit. So it was absolutely embarrassing that we had to deal with that for the longest time, okay? But since the Trudeau's resignation, a new leader has emerged, Mark Carney. Not many people knew who Mark Carney was, which we're going to unpack exactly who he is. But it was very interesting because Mark Carney won the leadership vote with 86% Liberal support, but it's worth mentioning that 2/3 of the Liberal membership was disqualified prior to the voting. None of this was reported by the mainstream media. Did you know that, Dean, that 2/3 of the membership of the Liberal Party were disqualified for who knows what reason? It leaves like critics to think Mark Carney was an inserted politician, which I'll have some more evidence on why I think that is too.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It's probably similar to what they did with Bernie, did to Bernie in the States.
That's true, actually. Yeah, it's a good comparison. They just kind of
squeeze out the people that they think are not going to play ball, and fuck you. We're going to get the guy we want to win in there and give him the best chance.
The Liberals are such an establishment. I think that there's a testament. Tell me if you agree. Across the West, we're sick of the establishment politicians, which some people actually critique. Maxine on PBD, he's critiquing Pierre for being an establishment politician too. But the Liberals are these establishment politicians that the leaders that they put in reminds me of Joe Biden. The Democrats and the Liberals kind of move in sync. They're not true independent leaders. They're almost like Mark Carney. What people would argue he's an inserted leader.
Yeah, I think a lot of them nowadays here and in the States, they're just playing the game. They have no original thoughts. They don't have any opinions that they hold deeply. All they know is, what am I going to get voted in for? How can I maybe grease the most wheels to get myself a fat paycheck on the way in, on the way out, and in between? We saw that with Trudeau. There was many scandals, financial scandals with him that he seemed to slide and slip right by.
Yes.
I mean, that just reeks of
many
corruption.
times. Every week, every day there was something new. But
yeah.
and that's another thing worth highlighting, guys, is that it's not just Trudeau, it's the Liberal Party in general. They enabled this behavior. They enabled the ethics violations. We can't separate the two. And I really want to highlight that through this conversation. So bear with me as I highlight that, because people are I feel like we sometimes forget. We forget the damage that the Liberals have done. We forget that Trudeau and the Liberals the same. We forget. So we need to remember that, and we're going to remember that this throughout this conversation. The Liberal Party also, there's another thing that they did in the leadership race. They disqualified Ruby Dahlia for claims of violations, breaches in the Canadian Elections Act, non-disclosure of material facts, and inaccurate financial reporting. That's what they claimed she employed throughout her time in the leadership race, which then ultimately led to her getting disqualified. But Ruby Dahlia actually refuted these allegations, okay, labeling them as fabricated and fake. She claimed that parts actions were intended to prevent her from challenging Mark Carney, because she actually had compelling support, guys. She had very compelling support, posing significant threat to Mark Carney's leadership and success, okay? Her disqualification reflects the Liberal Party's intolerance for outsiders challenging the status quo and reinforces critics' assessment that Mark Carney is an inserted Liberal selected face, which you look at it now, and Ruby Dahlia, which I'm hopefully going to be having a conversation with her soon, she was doing so well, and she was like somewhat of the outsider to the Liberal Party. Back to our point about the Liberal Party being this establishment politicians that have this establishment outlook. They have an inserted politician. They select somebody like Mark Carney to play ball and insert him with the aligned values that he has, which we'll talk about that specifically. And then anybody who's able or possibly close to contesting that, like Ruby Dahlia, they remove her from the party. That was insane. Another thing that they did, Dean, I just found this out the other day. The Liberals forced out the Nepean sitting MP, I don't even know how to say his name, Chandar Arya, and replaced it with Carney. No race needed. Did you know about this? So Mark Carney didn't have a seat. He wasn't an MP. He doesn't have a seat in Parliament, right?
Yeah.
So Nepean, that riding, I believe that's where Mark Carney might reside. They found a way, which he actually put his name in the hat to run this guy here.
Yeah.
They found a way to fabricate, like they did with Ruby Dahlia, that there were some violations, and they removed him from the seat, then just inserting Mark Carney, versus Mark Carney having to actually run a by-election, go and actually get elected. Because imagine he didn't get elected by that riding, then that disrupts the whole momentum, etc. What are your thoughts on this, like, Liberal Party fucking finding a way to disqualify any opposition and just inserting Mark Carney in that seat? And there's no really, like, there's a little bit of pushback on it, but these are like major concerns, man.
Yeah, I think it's like I said before. I think it's just, honestly, it doesn't even fucking surprise me at this point. It feels exactly like what they did to, I mean, it's a smaller scale, but I think it's exactly what they did to Bernie. They kind of squeezed him out, even though he was supposed to be the one. They did it to him fucking twice. They did it to, what's her name? Tulsi Gabbard. They have no...
They ostracize these people that try to challenge the status quo, like we mentioned.
They do more than that. They do. It's not even just a little bit of political PR. It's like insane shit. Like they were doing with RFK Jr. They were making sure his votes don't count in certain states, and if he does visit this state, it's going to go to Biden anyways. Like they do insane shit because there's no, at least in the States, there's no laws against that kind of stuff. The Democratic Party is a Democratic Party. They can pick whoever the fuck they want. They can kind of, put in whoever they want as candidates, and then
it's insane because they always say, like, oh, Trump is a threat to democracy, and the talking points here is that, but that is a fundamental overreach in democracy.
Yeah,
you can't just like make up some fugazi claims about financial violations or this violation and it's a breach of this, and then just remove your own party. I can't believe that Liberals are still supporting this and that this is still happening in modern day Canadian politics. It's baffling to me, but for some way, shape, or form, Carney and the Liberals seem to see some promising opening support with the best. It's kind of going back and forth, but now due to the federal polling, the big bad Trump is sort of influencing the support of Carney, and then also I think it's somewhat the honeymoon stage that Carney's going through right now, where there seems to be Canadians are supporting them and stuff. But it's similar to like what happened with Kamala Harris, man. She came in. The pre-poll said, oh, Kamala's going to win. She's doing so well. I remember people coming out to me, oh, it looks like she's going to win. The same narrative and the same talking points that's happening right now. So I would urge people to be careful to take these pre-polls with a grain of salt, which we'll get more into them shortly. But there is a sense of a honeymoon stage. There is a sense of a refreshing face. There is a sense of the liberal media that's pushing these narratives. These polls are very biased. I asked the average viewer right now, how many times have you answered a poll and done a poll when they call you on the phone? Not many times, okay? Only the psychos do it. But let's find out who Mark Carney is, okay, guys? Because we have to understand who this new liberal leader is. Mark Carney is Trudeau 2.0, okay? That's the first thing I want to say. He is a globalist banker with no real political experience who has parachuted into the prime minister role by default due to Trudeau's failed leadership. So the Liberals did so bad and Trudeau did horrendous to the fact that they needed a default prime minister, of which they inserted Mark Carney. He spent most of his career cozying up to the elite financial institutions, serving as the governor of the Bank of Canada and later the Bank of England, where he prioritized woke ESG policies over real economic solutions. Is this who we want our leader of Canada to be? Because currently he is by default, but do we want that to continue, guys? Former UK Prime Minister is on record voicing her distaste for Mark Carney, highlighting her surprise on his selection. She stated his policies led to the country's bankruptcy. Okay, Carney has never been elected in anything in Canada, yet Liberals are literally handing him over the country because it's their only chance to sell a new face and confuse Canadians that this is a new, refreshed start for the Liberal Party. It's not different, guys. We need to remember he supported Trudeau throughout his whole time in office, and he elected 83% of the same members that Trudeau had in government. So let's pause there for a second. Let's understand this. Trudeau's government was made up of Liberals, and those Liberals have now been selected to be in Mark Carney's government. 83%. I read 87% somewhere, but then I think I got fact checked there and it was 83%. The point is that it's an overwhelming majority. So the same government that we had for the past 9 years that destroyed this country is overwhelming majority the same government that we're going to have if Mark Carney wins. Can you really separate the difference, Dean? When you look at this on face value with some of these metrics and these things that we're discussing here, and the opening statements with Mark Carney and his globalist agenda, he's a WEF globalist to the T. Can you separate the two? Do you look at them and go, this is one or the same? What do you see?
Honestly, I think he's worse. I think he's probably
Really?
sneakier, and he's probably smarter than Trudeau. I think Trudeau's kind of a moron. He reminds me of Ralph Wiggum from The Simpsons a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
He's just kind of a dummy. He's probably got people telling him what to do and what to think, and he's just going along for the ride. I think Carney's a little sneakier, and he's probably a little more devious, and probably a lot smarter than Trudeau. So I'm actually a lot more worried about him than I would be even Trudeau.
Yeah, he seems like he's not as dumb, but he's like a polished.
He knows how to speak. He doesn't sound as outrageous as Trudeau. You know what I mean? He's not going to have the pride flag flying behind him at every talking engagement that he holds. He's going to seem a lot more reasonable, and I think he's smarter and just sneakier in general. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't separate the two. And we have to remember, for the people listening, for people watching, guys, Carney supported Trudeau throughout his time as prime minister. Okay, so if you weren't happy with the state of the country for the past 9 years, you're not going to be happy with Carney. Okay, so for the people that continue to just vote Liberal no matter what, especially the older folks, because that's what we see that are doing it, take a chance. There's a change that's right in front of you. Think about it for a second. Don't just go ahead and vote blindly, because Carney is another fake good person, elitist, okay? He's not a leader who understands the working class. He is a WEF, United Nations globalist, with a desire of reaching net zero, which he has planned in complete destruction of the fossil fuel industry, and he's even wrote it in his book called Values. So for this whole adjustment of the carbon tax, which I'm not even going to get into it right now because we're going to talk about shortly, he has the aspirations of this crazy mentality with this climate agenda of reaching net zero. He is going to, those taxes, they're going up. Just put it that way, okay? He is an aspiring WEF world leader motivated by DEI and other radical left woke policies. He is very hypocritical with his business practices, like his claims for climate action and repealing pipelines, but then investing in pipelines outside of Canada. So just think about the hypocrisy there, guys. It continues. It gets worse. Carney has found a way to not disclose his personal assets. Have you seen that, Dean?
Yeah, he put it in a blind trust or something.
Yes, exactly. He's found a way to not show his personal assets leading up to the Liberal leadership race. And then following his win, he announced that his assets are put in a blind trust, which the blind trust, for the people who don't know, removes the accountability. It keeps his assets as, what did I write here? He removes his accountability as if how his assets are managed, and the claim is that it will avoid conflicts of interest, but it allows Mark Carney to be able to distance himself from any questionable acts and accountability. Without transparency, Mark Carney could benefit from the financial interests without the public ever knowing. Political allies and business interest personnel can still benefit from the decisions made regarding the policies or the relationships fostering in office. It is argued that this creates a shadow network of influence that can circumvent ethical guidelines, okay? But the public is left in the dark. That's the issue. So what are your thoughts on this, Dean? Because he is putting all his assets, which obviously with implementation of policies and stuff, they can benefit his assets, which we've seen with Nancy Pelosi. She done that tremendously.
Yeah.
The Nancy Pelosi tracker, you've seen that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What do you thought? This is very shady, and it's right in front of us, but I don't see the challenge happening yet. I don't see people challenging it too much.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. I think you're going to get, like, some of the conservatives are going to challenge it and question it, but I think it's going to be business as usual. Yeah, that's just how it goes. I'm going to put it in a blind trust, and you're going to believe that it's going to, come across as a reasonable decision and the right thing to do if that's what you want to believe. It's going to be like everything else. If that's what you want to believe, you're going to believe that he's doing the right thing.
It's more acts of shadiness from the Liberal Party, which we need to call out, and that's what we're doing right here. But another thing I saw today, just worth mentioning, is that Carney is refusing to do the French debates. Did you see this?
No, I didn't hear that. Well,
Yeah.
That makes sense. He's probably not smart enough to do them in French.
But the thing is, that is insane, guys. So listen to this for a second. Canada is an English and French country. Like, there's French-speaking people here. We have Quebec and people that are also voters. Carney has decided to not do the French debates. How can you do that? There's voters in Quebec. How can that happen? That is insane. So right now he's committed to not do it. But we're going to see how that's going to unfold. But there's only going to be the English debates. There needs to be both. Okay, in the country of Canada, there needs to be both. And critics say he's not doing it because he's not very good at it. He's not very good at speaking French. But as the Prime Minister, as we many know, you need to be able to say "Je ne veux pas parler." You need to be able to speak French, guys. Let's talk about the carbon taxes. A lot of people were discussing this lately, guys. They were talking about how Mark Carney finally decided to make an adjustment on the carbon tax. But let's understand exactly Mark Carney and how he relates to taxing of carbon and other climate craziness, okay? Mark Carney has been a strong proponent of the carbon pricing, particularly with the carbon tax. During his tenure as the governor of the Bank of Canada, he championed the idea of the climate finance and carbon pricing, okay? He supported Trudeau in the implementation of the carbon tax. He supported Trudeau in the implementation of the carbon tax. Are we understanding this, guys? I read a funny comment, and I talked about this in my Instagram video. The Conservatives made the carbon tax so unpopular that even Liberals needed to make a change on it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, guys. They are acting in accordance to opinion polling that most Canadians are not supporting the carbon tax because it's destroying this country. The carbon tax has raised the cost for everyday Canadians without effectively removing any emissions. It disproportionately impacts families and businesses, especially in energy-dependent provinces, driving up the price of goods, transportation, and heating. Carney supported Trudeau with the carbon tax. Do we understand that, guys? Let's not forget that. Remember that. Carney pushed the carbon tax on a global scale and claims that the importance of reducing emissions, but he enjoys the perks of luxury living, private jets, and business dealings that contribute to the larger environmental footprint. This is insane. Dean, what are your thoughts on him on changing the carbon tax, man, but to 0%? Because that's what he did. Effectively, people were like, I saw Mario talk about this. A couple people, they're like, oh, it's legislation. So for the people listening, guys, it's legislation. The carbon tax is still in there, but what he did is he moved it to 0%. So how easily can he just go back up to X amount percent, you know?
I think as soon as the country starts to recover a little bit, he's going to just dial it up again. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Like, he realizes it's a very unpopular thing. Of course, it's a general tax on absolutely everything. It drives up the cost of everything from food to running shoes. So he understands that's going to be wildly unpopular. That's probably why a lot of people are not voting Liberal this term. So if he just says, yeah, we're not doing that for now, and yeah, if I can dial it up and down as I please, and when my friends need it up, I'll put it up, and when they need it down, I'll put it down. So I don't trust him at all to keep it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he's doing it just in time for this election, and he wants to kick it up to the corporations and the other industries, but it's going to trickle down more tenfold. But Pierre's argument is that it's going to trickle down tenfold.
I think it will too. Yeah, those companies never just eat the cost. They don't just like, oh, we'll reduce our CEO's bonus this year. They're going to fuck you. We're raising prices, and you guys can pay for it. Slowly, we'll raise the prices, and you guys can get fucked.
Exactly. This carbon tax hasn't really done much for us, guys, except destroy and cause much inflation, which we've seen throughout. Or maybe you get $150, $200 every quarter.
What I'd love to actually see is what the fuck have they done with the money that they've saved or they've pulled in from this carbon tax? Where has it gone? Because in Canada, we're a fraction of the problem on this planet. If you really want to take that issue seriously, we're a fraction of a fraction. So what the fuck are you doing destroying our entire economy because it's such an emergency? They're acting like there's an asteroid on the way to hit the planet, and it's, you know, like China, one city in China eclipses everything that happens.
I would
in
imagine
Canada tenfold.
Or India and like some of these other countries.
Yeah, all those countries that are underdeveloped. That's where the focus should be if you want to worry about it. A carbon tax in Canada doesn't do fucking anything but raise prices.
It's raised prices on the average Canadian, taking more money out of our pockets. Okay, and Carney, and to your point, Carney actually hasn't outlined any practical, actionable solutions. Okay, guys, the Conservatives argue more effort should be put into innovation, infrastructure development, and creating jobs in the emerging industries rather than the tax schemes and penalizing industries. His adjustment to the carbon tax at 0% is to appease voters because the Conservatives have made the carbon tax so unpopular. So let's not give the Liberals points for something they put in. They put in the carbon tax, and now we're all of a sudden celebrating the fact that Mark Carney put it to 0%. They put it in there. Let's remember that, okay? And Pierre Poilievre basically wanted to spark an election over axing the tax. He was the one who talked about that from the beginning. And it's interesting because you look at some of the plans from the Conservatives, Mark Carney is somewhat emulating the same thing, and axing the tax is one of them. The GST on first-time home buyers for $1 million, under $1 million, something like that, under $1 million. He's copying a lot of the blueprint here, and there's good reason why. Now let's talk about the federal polls, guys, because a lot of people, in the group chats and throughout social media, you see a lot of people talking about, oh, the federal polls are indicating that the Liberals are actually ahead, or that the Liberals have closed the gap. Do you take these polls seriously, Dean? Do you think these fucking polls are are serious by any measure?
No, I think we were talking the other day before the other show. No, I don't trust the polling, like the official quote unquote polling. Honestly, I trust the betting apps and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the betting apps are interesting. What do those show?
I think they're showing that the Conservatives have still a lead, but it's a smaller lead. Like the odds of betting on Pierre are lower now, right? So I think it's, like I said, a closer race. I think it's defined by age, though. This election is going to be defined by age, not gender or
which we'll
race.
talk about how we can capitalize that in different ways. Yep. But I would urge the average Canadian or the voter listening, don't let the pre-polls halt your action to show up to the polls. Okay, they try this in the U.S. They tried it in the U.S. with Kamala Harris, like we just talked about earlier on in the podcast here, and they're trying it again here. They do this all the time. Those polls take it with a grain of salt, okay? We look at Canada right now, and Pierre has been in dominance for the longest time, and then all of a sudden with this change and then with what's happening in the U.S., there's been a big shift in the polls. But don't let those polls halt you from showing up. Make sure you show up to the polls. This is the most important election in Canadian history. So the recent polls indicate a significant shift in Canada with the political landscape. According to many polls, the Liberals have taken a lead for the first time in 2021 with a 38% of the vote, while the Conservatives apparently trail at 36% of the vote. So they've sort of closed the gap. And as every day goes on and this campaign trail takes hold and it continues, we're going to see that gap shift, and we're going to see the Conservatives back on top, because there's many reasons on why this is happening, okay, guys? But the Conservatives lost a 21-point advantage with two main reasons, which is pretty intense. 21-point advantage. Like, they were up significantly, and then now apparently they're significantly down. But there's many reasons for that, but I think there's two main reasons. The new leader, Mark Carney, is in the honeymoon stage, and he is backed by the liberal media, which we know that as a fact. And the other thing is the Trump situation going on in the United States. So Trump took office on January 6th of this year, which many Canadians supported him and supported his policies and yearned for the same bureaucratic cuts in our country and the overspending accountability. But his actions with the tariffs and the 51st state and our sovereignty threats have really influenced the polls. And let's talk about that exactly. So how is the United States affecting the Canadian polls? Well, one thing they're doing is the liberal media is painting this picture that the big bad Trump is attempting to attack Canadian sovereignty and drawing comparisons to Trump and Poilievre, which have seemed to be scaring Canadians. So that's affecting it a little bit. For example, the Conservatives held a substantial lead in December of 2024 with a 26-point advantage, which has now diminished and switched. The liberal media is confusing voters and using Trump, tariffs, and sovereignty threats as a tool to alter the polls, okay? This issue is arguably the deciding factor that sent Canadians to the poll. So with everything that's happening with Donald Trump, this has issued fear in Canadians. But we need to urge Canadians to stay calm. We have to remember that we were prorogued for 3 months. So if it was so much of a concern, why was the government on halt for so long? Now we're like, okay, the liberals, the same people who got us in this situation, who displayed us as weak to the rest of the world, are going to get us out of the situation. We have to think, guys. We have to use our heads, because this could be an election that really affects the rest of our lives big time, as it already has with the liberals in power. Dean, what do you think about this? You think about one of the main reasons that Canadians are going to the polls and that the polls are sort of shifting preemptively as we approach it is because of Trump and these threats and these concerns?
Yeah, I think the threats to Canada, the 51st state shit, all that kind of stuff will unify the country a little bit. And I think generally people, when they're in times of quote-unquote crisis, it's not comparative, but I'll use 9/11 as an example. Bush's approval rating before the planes hit the towers was in the toilet. After they hit the towers, they didn't give a fuck. They just wanted to go kick some fucking ass.
Right.
And that's kind of what's happening here. Carney sounds pretty reasonable. It's kind of like when a stock goes up really high, it goes up 10, 15% in one day, and then they realize the reason it went up wasn't actually true, so it drops by 15%. It wasn't. Pierre's approval rating was really high because Justin Trudeau was a moron, and everybody and their sister could see it. So it was artificially, quote unquote, high. I think now that Carney's, like I said, a little smarter, a little more devious, a little more cunning. He's a little bit trickier to see through. I think it's going to affect the numbers a little bit, but I still think the general sentiment is the Conservatives win.
Yeah, they're capitalizing on fear, the liberal media especially. And
Yeah.
one of the other things is the market is really getting affected. The market is scared right now, and so people's stocks are going down. People are losing money. Their stocks are going down. There's fear of Canadian sovereignty being attacked. The liberal media is putting that in your face. The big bad Trump. Pierre Poilievre and him have similarities. Mark Carney, blah, blah, blah. And so it's affecting the pre-polls, and these things are discouraging Canadians and really affecting it in a negative way, in my opinion. So we need to really be careful on how we travel through this. But touching on Trump here for a second, there was a video that I saw recently, and it was Trump talking with Laura Ingraham, and she was getting interviewed, and he was talking about the Canadian election. He said he doesn't care what happens in the Canadian election. And he said it would actually be easier to deal with a liberal. Did you see this video?
Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
What did you think about that, Dean?
It's hard to tell. Is he playing 3D chess? Is he saying that it's easier to deal with the Liberal because he knows that'll boost the Conservatives, and he really wants to deal with Pierre? It's hard to say. But I mean, of course, the general sentiment is it's easier to deal with somebody you can push around. So,
I agree. Like from his perspective, I'll tell you my thoughts on it. Number one, I honestly was disappointed. I think out of all the things that I've ever heard Trump say, that one I was disappointed as a Canadian, because a lot of Canadian Conservatives in particular, I bet you if you did some polling of people who support the Conservative Party of Canada, probably majority support Trump as well and are in alignment with his values and his policies for the most part. But it was disappointing because as a Canadian, we really would hope for something better. But when you say that you don't care what happens in the Canadian politics, I guess speaking from Americans' perspective, America first, which we need a government that's going to put Canada first. So I can understand in that sense, but it was a little bit discouraging, and it was a little bit disheartening to hear him say that, because it's like, why don't you care what happens in this election? We can do good business. We can make positive things happen. And also just take it from a perspective, why do we got to suffer with another liberal leadership for the next couple of years? Give us some love, show us some support. But in his defense, I guess what he's saying is that Pierre Poilievre didn't show any support to him.
Yeah.
And
well, of course,
he's
Trump's
no friend
wildly unpopular, even with people who supported him. Like, I know a bunch of people who were pro-Trump, pro-conservative before all the tariff stuff happened, and even with them, he's become unpopular. So I think Pierre's got the right move in saying I'm not going to be friends with this guy until he respects us. Like, we're going to push back, and we're going to make sure that we are treated fairly. Right?
Yeah, he can't show support for Donald Trump, especially during this time,
No,
which I don't
definitely not.
expect him to.
But that's why Trump's going to hate him, right? That's exactly what he said. He said some nasty things about me, or
which he didn't
like
really
that.
say anything.
Nothing nasty.
But the way Trump operates, which everybody here listens and knows, is if you demonstrate loyalty to him and show him support, he'll like you back.
Right.
So you're not going to get that from Pierre Poilievre, unfortunately. But
not right now.
Well, we'll talk about who pairs up better with Donald Trump, but definitely I'm thinking right off the bat, it's definitely going to be Pierre Poilievre. Let's be honest here. We've already had a liberal government for the longest time with 2 Trump terms, and they didn't do very good. They didn't do much for Canadians. They didn't go to bat for you guys, okay? The country's in rough shape, and there's good reason for that. And it's because of the Liberal Party of Canada. So we need to remember that, okay? So out of the 2, maybe we discuss it right now. Who do you think would pair up better, Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre? Let's kind of unpack it from a positive, negative standpoint. How do you think that kind of plays out?
Well, by pair up, you mean would be easier to deal with for Trump? I think Carney's going to bend over a little quicker than Pierre would for a lot of the policies. I think Pierre and him would get along better. They have similar values. They're conservatives and Republicans. They're going to have the same opinion on, releasing energy stockpiles that we have, that kind of stuff. I think it's going to be much better for our country if we have a conservative dealing with Trump than we long term. Obviously, right now they're butting head to head, and Trump's got to say, "I don't give a shit. We're going to win anyways," because he's got to talk like that. You know what I mean? He's got to act as if it doesn't really matter because my plan's going to work either way. So I don't care who the fuck wins over there. That's his attitude he's got to have. But I think Pierre long term will be much better for this country to deal with somebody like Trump. I think we're going to be much richer. We're going to have much more money in our pockets. If you're talking about, but he's already, you know what I mean. The tax cuts that are proposed by Pierre are going to be better for the general public. All that kind of stuff.
We'll talk about that specifically.
Yeah, but with Trump, Pierre, for sure, I think he's going to be able to deal with them better.
And you mentioned a good point. The oil and gas industry, guys. Who do you think is going to do better at business with Trump, who's in alignment with really exploring those resources?
Mark Carney, our energy.
Yeah, they need our energy, and we have a lot of it here. We have a lot of good resources here in minerals, okay? So the one who's going to do better at it is Pierre, okay? We need to consider that going forward because they're our biggest trading partner and we're having these threats with tariffs. We need somebody who's going to be able to negotiate with them. And we've already gave the Liberal Party their trial and they did a horrible job. So it's time for the Conservatives. And we need somebody who's going to do good business with Trump because we can make a lot of money together. Okay, so let's talk about Pierre Poilievre specifically. And we're going to talk about where he's lacking and we're going to talk about his plan. So for voters listening, we can understand a little bit where he can improve and then also what his plan is, because we need to know his plan. Critics say he doesn't have a plan, but he definitely has a plan. But throughout his time trying to demonstrate the transparency of how bad the Liberal government and Trudeau was, he needed to highlight how bad they were doing. So he really emphasized that. His plan is very evident, and he's been talking about it a lot, which he had some new announcements today, which we're going to talk about. But let's talk about, firstly, some improvements. He needs to stay away from opinion polling politics because it will sway back and forth, which Maxime Bernier talked about on the PBD podcast. He said that Pierre is a little bit more leaning towards the establishment side of politics and really swaying in relation to the opinion polling, which I know they did that through COVID big time. The Liberals in particular, depended on, and then on a provincial level, the Ontario government, depending on what the sentiment was from the populace, they would kind of go towards that, but never a hard stance on in alignment with their values. He needs his reluctance to do untraditional media like podcasts and stuff like that. I urge Pierre Poilievre's team, which I've reached out to personally, which I would be an honor to have a conversation with him. They did actually get back and they said, we've talked to our team. We'll see what happens. It's a long shot. We know that.
Sure.
But to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, explore the avenues of untraditional media. Explore the avenues of podcasts, because we saw the success that it actually led Trump to. It really was attributed that Trump's success was very much in alignment with his efforts to doing podcasts. He did quite a bit of podcasts. He did the Joe Rogan podcast, the PBD podcast. He did many others in the lead up to the election. So I don't know why Canadian Conservatives aren't looking at this and going, this is an avenue that we can take too, and it's a real way to tap in on long form conversations and discuss policies and concerns in length. And it kind of separates you from that establishment robotic, I'm doing the news, CBC, CP24, CTV, doing the same things that everybody else. Dean, why do you think he's been reluctant to, which we still have a lot of time, mind you, right?
Yeah.
He could be on this podcast, God willing.
Yeah.
But why do you think there's been, the critics have a little bit of weight right now with the fact that he's been a little bit reluctant to do podcasts and alternative sources of media?
I think, whenever you're running for prime minister or such a high position, you got to put your resources where you think they're going to have the biggest bang for your buck. And I think right now podcasts are obviously a younger crowd. I think it's going to affect a younger crowd. It's probably a younger crowd listening. So he's kind of got that. I think where he's trying to spend his time strategically and money is on the older crowd. That's not in his favor right now, because all the polls are showing the younger you are, up to legal voting age, the more likely you are to vote conservative. So he's got that crowd,
which was very unique because usually, like, the younger you are, you vote liberal.
Yeah. But I think, like I said earlier in the show here, I think the real reason is the older crowd is doing okay while the younger crowd is struggling, and they want something new. They realize that this way of living is not worked for them, right? So I think they're more willing to switch it up and see what this guy can do instead, whereas the older crowd isn't. And I think he's probably trying to stick with traditional media because, especially in Canada, that's where the older eyeballs are. CTV, all the press conferences that he knows are going to get clipped up and put on those traditional news programs. But I think he could have a pretty big, I'm sure he's thinking about it. He's not totally blind to the fact that he could get on Joe Rogan. He can get on these huge podcasts, even if he only does one or two even, and have a huge impact.
Yeah, I hope that he does, because I think that, he may have the younger vote secured, but I think there's still more of the populace that he can tap into. For example, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show here, we have apolitical individuals. I think 40% of Canadians are still undecided.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big portion that he can tap into.
Sure.
And I think he could do that through social media. It's the technological evolution in the sense that we have these avenues like social media and podcasting and these long form conversations that he can really tap in to many different voters. But I think a part of his reluctance is that the media is going to spin things. If he goes on a conservative podcast in the United States, they'll spin that.
Sure.
But maybe he goes on Canadian podcasts and then they won't have look, he's buddying up with the Americans kind of thing. Yeah. So, hopefully he considers to do long form conversations. That he did one with Jordan Peterson and it was a tremendous conversation, which a lot of Canadians loved it and they retained a lot of information from. So I encourage you to do more of the same, Pierre. There is so much of the untapped market that you can capitalize on. So really, really think about that, please, because that's huge. But one other thing is to employ hard conservative values. Really, Canadians are yearning, and young people in particular who can't buy a home and stuff like that, they're looking for strong conservative values. I know that's the critique on the provincial level with the Ford government, is that Canadians are still supporting, someone like Doug Ford because mainly they don't want to vote Liberal. But they yearn for more of a conservative stance on a lot of things. So I hope on a federal level, we can maintain those efforts because it's very important. Now let's talk about Pierre's plan. So as we wrap up here, guys, we're going to talk about his plan, and then we're going to talk about what the damage that the Liberals have done. So let's talk about Pierre's plan. His mission aims to restore the Canadian promise, ensuring that hard work leads to good pay, a pension, home ownership, and safe neighborhoods plus smaller government. That is the mission. How can you not resonate with that mission? That's a very important mission, and that's something that we yearn for here in Canada. So Pierre's promise. Let's talk about some of his promise in regards to hard, factual plans. He wants smaller government. He wants to cut the income tax by 15%. That was just announced. Did you see that?
Yeah, for the lower income brackets, he wants to cut it by 15%.
But he says in a way it's going to affect everybody.
Yeah.
So it'll affect everybody, your income.
Oh, I didn't see that. I saw that he was going to cut the lower. I have to look into that. It just happened today, I think, right?
Yeah, it literally just happened today. So he wants to cut the income tax by 15%. That's going to affect everybody in some way, shape, or form. But like you said, Dean, is going to be more zoned in on a certain bracket. He wants to cut the bureaucracy, cut foreign aid, cut corporate welfare to large corporations, and use the savings to bring down the deficit, which we have an extensive one, and bring down the taxes, unleash the free enterprise system. He wants to repeal C-69, the anti-energy law, and make it attractive for businesses to do a value-added work in this country. This is very important when you think about it, guys. We need to bring in the business in this country, and we need to remove the bureaucracy and the regulations that are stopping a lot of these explorations of our resources. Okay, we need to restore the oil and gas industry, repeal Bill C-75, which is the weak bill. The Liberals put in Bill C-75, which allows repeat offenders to keep getting released onto the streets. Are you sick of hearing about a car stolen on your street? Are you sick of hearing about the violent offenses that continue to happen in Canada? If you are, you got to vote Conservative, because the Liberals are weak on crime and they have allowed repeat violent offenders to be released back into Canada and to terrorize the communities of law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, okay? He wants to cut the government spending, axe the carbon tax, which now the Liberals have done, but that was his plan the whole time, stop the money printing, incentivize the municipalities to speed up the permits, cut development charges, and free up the land, or they will lose their federal infrastructure money and removing the federal GST on new homes. So with that being said, Dean, you look at that plans, some of those plans there, plus much more. That just highlights some of them. Do you think Pierre can bring us out of this mess?
Yeah, I think, it's a big mess, but I think it's going to take, the next 3, 4, 5 years. If he can get in and stick to the plan, I think we can get out of here and honestly be way ahead of where we were 5 years ago. Even
don't you think do we need a mandate though? Because where we're trending right now, it's still looking like a minority, but again, we're not going to take the polls too seriously. We need a mandate.
He's going to have to be able to make the moves and make them happen quick and without arguments. And, these are obvious no-brainer moves in my mind. These are this is not outrageous. This isn't cut the government by 60%. There's nothing outrageous in the stuff you just listed. So hopefully he's able to get it in and he's able to make it happen fast.
I hope so. And I hope so that Canadians are listening, are really considering this, because what has happened in the past 9 years under the Trudeau and the government and the Liberals has been actually devastating. And I think that we have a short attention span. So I'm going to remind you guys of some of the things that the Liberals have done to this country in the past 9 years. And we call it the Trudeau effect and the Liberal effect, but it's also the Carney effect because he supported this government for the past 9 years, okay? Trudeau has destroyed the country and Carney has supported him while doing so. The crime and safety concerns that has happened under the Liberal government. Bill C-75, like we talked about, and Bill C-5. Look them up, guys. These are Liberal bills that have created more crime and allowed criminals to run rampant in this country. Violent crime is soaring. The increased homelessness and tent cities we've seen pop up around this city of Toronto and other major cities in this country. Food banks are at a record high. Division amongst Canadians is extensive as well, especially if we look what happened through COVID. Do we remember what happened through COVID, guys? What Trudeau did to us through COVID with the federal mandates and what he done to some of our Canadian citizens, which we'll talk about in a second. The extensive scandals from the Liberal government, the We scandal amongst 60 others, the censorship bills like Bill C-11 and Bill C-18. They censored us. Remember when you go on your phone and you go to look up something? That is because of the Liberals, and Bill C-11 and Bill C-18 plays into our censorship rules and why Canadians can't speak freely in some instances. But we need to bring that back. We need to stop that, and that's what the Conservatives want to do. He froze the bank accounts of Canadian citizens during the truckers' convoy. That was insane. The first time in history, implementing the Emergencies Act, unprecedentedly. We have to remember these things. His handling of COVID-19 was horrendous. The radical increased money in federal bureaucracy increased by 40% in bodies and it increased in federal consultants. Bigger government. That's what we're talking about when you talk about something like that. The deficit is at a reported $61.9 billion, exceeding the initial projection of $40 billion. The deficit is the difference between what it spends versus what it brings in. So not doing very well as a country as a whole. And we want to also the inflation, the groceries, productions costs, service pricing, the taxes. Let's talk about the taxes, the capital gain tax, the carbon tax, the high payroll tax, the high business tax, plus income tax. If you make $100K, you're paying 26% or more in taxes. This doesn't include when you get that money and then you go and spend it, guys. HST, GST, all these taxes that we have in Canada, they've increased. You need taxes to be able to contribute to society and be able to make things work. But taxes have increased significantly under this Liberal government. We cannot forget that. And then immigration. Something that has really, really affected this country in the past 9 years. And the Liberals have opened up our borders and really removed the regulations on immigration and destroyed this country in the process. Okay, we have had mass immigration. Some people call it an invasion over the past 9 years under this Liberal government. Just in 2023, 1.3 million people entered this country. And then just to give you guys perspective, there's 41 million people in Canada. So that's quite a large amount in comparison to our total population. And that's just not even including illegally entered. That's 1.3 million in 2023, just in 2023. And this mass migration, it affects housing, healthcare, the job market. Even Trudeau walked it back, calling everyone who criticized and everyone who criticized him, they called his immigration. He called their immigration when they challenged his immigration policy. He called them racist. So even he had to walk it back. And then Trump's tax has made him make an adjustment on the border. So guys, as we wrap up here, we need to remember the past 9 years of this Liberal government. It wasn't just Trudeau. Carney backed him. And he is a part of the same establishment that we know as the Liberal government. The ethics violations, the high inflation, the crime, the government overreach, the censorship, everything that we've been through in the past 9 years. Do not make the mistake of voting Liberal again. We need to really be careful. We go to the polls on April 28th. This is the most important election in Canadian history. We need to really pay attention, stay engaged, use your voice. People were complaining for the past 9 years. Dean, I don't know if I saw it on my Instagram. You go in the stories about complaining about the Liberal government, this, that, and the third. And now we have the opportunity to fix it with this government election. Dean, final thoughts as we wrap up here.
I think we got to keep it together here. Make sure that we're voting for the right person to get in power, so we can swing this country back around and bring it back to the times and that our parents had in this country, because they had the Canadian dream. They were doing it. You know, a lot of people our parents' age have a home. They're excited to live the rest of their life. That's how everybody should be living in this country. We're a rich country. We just have to unlock it.
And guys, we could do that by voting common sense. Out of all the parties and their values and their policies, the best path forward seems to be conservative. It's your right to vote. It's up to you. But this vote will really determine the future of this country. So with that being said, I'm going to go into the final segment, which I call Salute. It gives an opportunity to myself for today, not the guest, to end us off with a big salute. I'm going to give a salute to common sense, to the real average Canadian out there that's working their tail off, that has to give half their money to the government and that has no purchasing power. The young families that can't buy a home. The sovereign Canadian that wants to use their voice that is censored because of the Liberal government and then will continue to censor it. The concerned parent that is worried about their kid getting indoctrinated in schools. We all need to stick together. And you know how we do that? We show up April 28th and we vote conservative. Get to the polls, vote for common sense, changes among us. I love you guys, nobody else. I will see you guys very soon. Hopefully have some very interesting guests coming on this podcast, because we are going to go hard throughout the next month, 2 months, as we anticipate the biggest election in Canadian history. So I appreciate all you guys. Dean, I appreciate you. Thank you for the input. Thank you for the insight. Until next time, I love you, nobody else. Ciao.